Hi, welcome. I'm Anna Mills. I'm a writing teacher at College of Marin in the San Francisco Bay Area in the US. And I'm very excited for this session on AI research tools. I love seeing all the introductions in the chat and folks sharing their professional background and where you are and your favorite celebratory drink. I'm getting excited seeing all the references to mocha lattes and bubble teas and such. So welcome everyone. And we just did this and I'm going to put this back in the chat so you have the slides, and these are open for commenting and you're welcome to share them, adapt them. They are open licensed. Okay, so just to give you a little preview of what I have planned, I'm going to talk a little bit about this idea that AI can work with sources and what that means for our changing research process, what it might mean, share an approach to guiding students around this, to use such assistance skeptically. And then we'll look at an academic research app, a little more specifically, Elicit.org. And then I want to give a quick overview of the variety of other apps for academic research assistance and the kind of their different specialties, because it also gives us a sense of what's possible and what kinds of things we might want to do. And I have a couple of polls, and I'm happy for folks to interrupt me, put questions in the chat, raise your hand. I love being responsive, and you're welcome to give pushback as well. I love that too. Okay. So,
Did Anna just drop out? Yeah, I thought it was me, and then I realized everybody else was typing.
loss of internet briefly. And okay. So I was sharing that Kevin Roos has found AI to be the best research assistant he's ever had. He asks it questions like, make me a timeline of the major cyber attacks in the last 10 years. And he says, of course, I will fact check that. But he still finds it to be incredibly useful. And I was surprised by this, but also, of course, intrigued. Like, I can't, if he's saying it's that useful. And we know the New York Times has fact checkers, right? So this is not just someone who's playing fast and loose with sources. So you're all sharing, you're seeing my screen again, right? Okay.
Yes.
Let
Now
me
we
know
are.
if you are.
No.
Okay. So I just thought we would take a poll before we get into this. On a scale of 1 to 4, how much have you used AI, generative AI, meaning there's something beyond Google search, traditional Google search, for help finding sources and working with them? 1, I haven't used it yet. 2, I've used it a little. 3, quite a few times. Okay, great. So thank you, Veronica. Yes, 0. Go for it. Go for the 0. Yeah, maybe you refuse to, maybe you don't want to, or maybe it's just that feeling of like, I don't know what this is, so I can't, I don't know yet what it is, right? So real range, Mark Marino, awesome, I know is an expert at this, but it's good to see a lot of 2s, 1s, couple 3s, so good range. So let's see what this looks like. I think that the thing that I find important to frame to students, and maybe is useful for you as well, is that we maybe have heard this idea that AI is no good with sources, that it makes up sources. They're with or searching the internet. So there's some hybrid. Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. It seems that I'm having internet issues. I can try to keep going, or I can get back off and
turn
get
your
on another
camera off.
network.
No, maybe just turn your camera off and
Okay.
let's see if that helps with the audio.
Okay. Okay. So such a range of systems from ChatGPT to Google's Gemini, Microsoft Copilot, of the statistical prediction engine that's predicting the next word, right? You can kind of see that would tend to make up sources, but they're sort of hardwiring that to actually looking in databases. And this is happening in the academic research assistants in the look at later, like Elicit, SciSpace, Scite, Consensus, on. So this is kind of it's good and bad news. It, on one hand, it sounds like a dream. One of the big problems that we've been hearing about with AI. So we don't want it to make things up, right? But in most cases for research, getting the text response, talk to it in natural language, technical with search. So there's all this potential, but it doesn't really work reliably. And it's not always clear when it's working and when it's not. Sometimes this kind of AI research assistant will summarize the source correctly, and sometimes it will get it wrong. Sometimes it will tell that sounds related. So we have to be really skeptical. And you might have already seen the reviews that they launched recently, or with the very popular app Perplexity that kind of got ahead of Google in offering answers to your search query, as well as some sources, right? But the first thing it does is generate an answer that's supposed to be based on the sources. So you may have heard that with Google's AI overviews that there were various scandals So Casey Newton, reporter, shared on Threads.
Hey, Anna, your voice is cutting up again, and there's a lag between what you're saying and the slides. Did you say you might be able to switch to another network? Is that still a possibility?
Can folks hear me?
Not well, unfortunately, you're cutting up again. If you
Okay.
have some other
All right.
option.
Yeah, I'm gonna move into a different space real quickly.
Okay. While Anna's moving, which ones of the things?
Okay, we will try. Thanks. So as you can see, these AI overviews, even though they're based on sources, are not reliable. And though sometimes they can do fairly well, they're susceptible to the same kinds of concerns about bias that other AI text generation is. And they might seem more neutral or more authoritative. So I tried a little experiment where I asked Google, what makes life worth living? And it said, the concept of a life worth living is based on an individual's values and interests and can help people find contentment and joy in everyday life. And I just noticed that that was essentially a secular answer, and it was individualistic. And that the source that it cited as its top source was Psychology Today. So a magazine based on psychology. So I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying that that you see that there's a particular kind of Western secular individualistic focus there that it's being presented as an answer, as authoritative. And so that's something to be aware of with this, even though there is a source. And here's a case where it did pretty well. I asked Perplexity which Okay. Did I miss cool stuff though? I was going to invite people to sort of test this something similar on Perplexity. So, just as a warning, I wanted to share that, Perplexity, I've started to use it. It's quite useful, but it's easy to miss when it's wrong. So here I asked it, what Ezra Klein thought AI will do to the internet. And it gave a summary that was quite relevant to the podcast that I had listened to. But it quoted Ezra Klein, and I was like, wait, did he actually say that? And it turns out no, even though there's a footnote there, which goes to a source which is relevant, that source actually says that somebody else said that quote, right? It's his guest. So they'll get it wrong in these subtle ways. So I thought we could test that. If you want to ask Perplexity a question about something you actually know a lot about, so you can tell pretty quickly. Thank you, John. And thank you all for staying. I appreciate it. And if folks want, I could re-record a session where it goes smooth, and you could have a smooth recording if you want. But if you'll just test that right now, something that you know quite a bit about, and try the same question in Google, see how that compares. Google has not told us when it gives AI overviews and when it doesn't. So we just have to test and sort of see. Sometimes it'll just give search results, and sometimes it'll attempt an AI answer. And if anyone's willing to share in the chat what you asked and how well Perplexity did, first, how good is the answer, and then how good is the selection of sources. So I could test this at the same time. Okay, great. Thanks, John. And how does it do at that? I certainly couldn't evaluate anything about the secondary metabolites in echinacea. So, it's giving you this answer, but spot on. Okay, good to know. Yeah. Coastal history, yeah, so it's interesting to test it on things that are very local or where there's not a lot of data. Better than expected, but pulling from older textbooks, 15 years old. There was one good source. Interesting. Interesting. So the Perplexity sources were better than the Google sources in Veronica's test. And John is seeing really good academic science sources. But Maha saw it, made something up that does not exist or work. So right there, we see the danger and we see the seduction in this kind of range of performance. Yeah, for some reason it really likes Reddit. I have found that to be the case. Now, one thing you can do is try to get it to filter the kinds of sources it's using. So let me just show you that in Perplexity. I didn't know about this focus button for a long time, but you can get it to just use academic sources. It will pull from Semantic Scholar. Or you can get it just to use Reddit. I'm not sure how often you'd want that. But you can focus the sources a little bit. Okay, so no, cats should not drink pasteurized milk. It was right. And okay, and John says it fails to find answers about a prominent art exhibition that are readily available from a Google search. So okay, that's good to know. So Reddit might be better at sort of fixing computers. So we're getting a sense of like these sort of varied, unpredictable performance. We kind of have to work with it to get any sense, and that sense may be shifting because these are sort of black box algorithms. We aren't given transparency into how they work. Thank you, Mark. Perplexity does not recommend using glue in pizza. That's a reference to something that Google Overviews did. And I think it's been corrected, but that was based on, I think, a joke in a Reddit post. So I think given this kind of experiment, how can we talk to students about this? Would students be ready to check for this? Would they be ready to be skeptical enough? Can we give them practice finding where it's mishandling sources or where it's giving sources that are actually not as credible as we need? I think Perplexity has different options. You can use it with OpenAI or different underlying models. But that's an interesting question I could look into. And then the other question is, do students have the reading skills to assess whether the AI summary is accurate to the source? And can we construct activities so that they practice that? So that they have the space to take the time to do that. So just a couple examples of things I've been trying around guiding students around this question of AI and sources. Fact-checking auto-generated AI hype. I asked ChatGPT to generate a list of claims and sources about AI, surprising things about AI. And you can get more about that assignment, including chat transcripts and all kinds of resources to try it at that link. But the idea was to give them an assignment where they're supposed to speak back to AI's use of sources. So it was correct. They were correcting it. They were checking, are these real sources? What do we think of the AI description of why they're credible? And we did find some misinformation in there. So we found, for example, I shared with them an example where it had made up a source that looked very credible, and cited an author who did not exist, Jan Bengio. And this was sort of a critical AI literacy opportunity because we could look into this and see that there was no Jan Bengio, but there was a Jan LeCun and a Joshua Bengio, and that the system had sort of merged those two names because those are two sort of godfathers of AI who have collaborated on research on the topics that were being discussed. And so I think showing the students an example of that and then asking them to look for similar kinds of things, to me, was a way to develop the skepticism. And then so it was making these grand claims like AI creates original art and music. And then, well, when we actually look at the source that it was citing, that was a real source, but it didn't really claim that, right? So we were analyzing that text to see, does that summary really fit? It was talking about art, but it didn't really claim that it was original. And we also found a very questionable description of why. So ChatGPT had used a Facebook AI blog as a source. And then when asked to describe why that was credible, it said, well, a company blog might not be a traditional academic source. It's a primary source in this case because it's directly from the team that conducted the research. And the students were ready to sort of roll their eyes at that. Like, we can't take a company press release as credible just because it's coming from the company that made the product, right? They're trying to sell it. So we were able to push back on that and sort of practice questioning, thinking about the motivation of the authors and any review process. There's no external review of the truthfulness of what's in that company blog, right? So that was sort of just a little sample of how I practice developing that skepticism. I wonder if before we go on to the academic research, if folks want to share any example or question, if that's something that you've tried to cultivate, if you've introduced AI with sources in a different way. Feel free to jump in. Okay. Well, feel free to jump in at any point if you think of other ideas you want to share around that. So I know that, as a writing teacher, I teach introductory composition, and a big piece of that is teaching academic research skills and a research paper, introducing students to academic databases, peer-reviewed articles, how to look for those, how to choose search terms, how to evaluate the credibility of different kinds of sources. So there are all kinds of apps that we're seeing for that, parallel to that basic model that we just saw in Perplexity and the Google AI overviews. So they're using real sources, but they're giving us summaries of them. They're trying to make that process of academic research more efficient. And the first one I encountered was Elicit.org, and I think folks were mentioning that in the chat earlier. So they bill it as, the nice, you don't need to put your search query in Boolean terms. It's natural language. You don't need to filter criteria. You can just tell it, I want papers published after 2020. So there's this sense that it's more accessible in a conversational way. There's this dream of like, I could chat with all the academic research, right? I can speak in my own way with that body of work, which is very appealing to someone who wants students to feel more comfortable entering this conversation, right? And here's what it looks like. So this was a student's topic, teacher shortages, and I was working with her on it. And you ask it a question, and so Elicit will summarize the top 4 papers it finds in relation to that question. It'll try to answer the question, generating AI text, and supposedly citing the sources that that helped it generate that text. And great, thanks. John is giving a great example where it did give an incorrect interpretation of the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. Yeah, I don't trust myself to interpret the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, but yeah. Okay, so and one thing that's nice there is that you're not having to put in the synonyms. So theoretically, it is trying out different search terms, teacher shortages, educator shortages, instructor shortages, etc. And it's also summarizing and kind of trying to show us the relationships between these top 4 sources. So that's potentially super useful, right? In showing students more quickly, helping them sort of scaffolding this process of showing, well, let's compare these papers and find where there's agreement and where there's a different approach, etc. But is it right? Same question here. It gives you this nice list of sources, and it summarizes the abstracts in one sentence. So instead of reading all the abstracts, you could just read the one sentence. I started to use that functionality, and then I thought I'd better test are these real? And I found that I had actually sort of neglected papers that would be of interest to me because the summary left out the most interesting points from the abstract, or what was really new or useful about the paper. So we can't trust those one sentence summaries, and we might miss something. You can see that there are a lot of options to use AI in so many ways. You can try to get a summary of the methodology, the outcome measured, the limitations, the main findings. So you can get different kinds of AI text generated in response to the source's text. And my students really enjoyed this kind of intuitive way to access databases. It was much easier than the library databases they were being trained to use. And I don't feel like I can turn away from, that's funny. So you're not seeing slides? It says I'm sharing. Shall I stop and try again? Okay, Mark sees them.
Yeah, we see them.
Okay. Okay. But there's also a big risk. So here's another example where I asked a question, and Elicit's answer was actually not really addressing my question. And it was misunderstanding the question, right? And so I was concerned, like, I don't know that a student would have the confidence to recognize that. They might think, oh, I'm not understanding it. It must be answering my question. I'm not understanding it. So that's a concern. Again, a need to practice speaking back and pushing back and recognizing where AI is wrong. I pretty much discussed this I don't need to go an example of how it was wrong, but this is the case where its one sentence summary missed a key point in this article about AI powered writing tools. And I think the danger here is that these apps are marketed for efficiency, and we're all under so much pressure that even if we don't believe in the idea of efficiency, we're constantly having to think about it and make choices about where to put our time, and we're very susceptible to the seduction of this. Analyze research papers at superhuman speed, automate time-consuming research tasks, you know, and the risk is huge. So I think Emily Bender, computational linguist from the University of Washington, who's been a big voice critiquing large language models, and Chirag Shah have argued that, we're losing some essential aspects of research with such efficiencies, that they may be detrimental to fundamental aspects of search, like information verification, information literacy, and serendipity also, because maybe we're just reading the overview and not looking through the sources. So I think I've kind of discussed these points already, that that the students then may miss out on some important reading and thinking practice, working with sources, if they are too quickly going for those efficiencies. Now, let me pause there and see stochastic parrots. Yes, that Emily Bender is one of the authors of the famous stochastic parrots article. Yeah, interesting. Is this increasing confirmation bias? Okay, so we've got a little bit of time, and I wanted to just give you a quick tour and see if others have tried these other apps besides Elicit, because I think they're really proliferating, and it's hard to keep up. So I think it might be nice to know a little bit about what each one does that's different, so we can think about, and then I want to find out what's most appealing, what seems most useful to you of these kinds of functionalities. So many of these, they all have similarities to Elicit in that they're working with databases of academic papers and bringing an AI layer. But consensus AI focuses on assessing how much agreement there is among scholars about a particular yes or no question. So if we want to know, do probiotics actually improve gut health, it would hopefully give us a meter. So it would say 94% of the 17 papers analyzed say yes, and gives us an AI summary of those papers that address that question. Very useful, but again, maybe looks too authoritative because it looks quantitative. Comes with a bunch of caveats that it may generate inaccurate information, but it's hard to remember that when you're seeing the little graph of, 94% of academics say yes to this question, but it might have summarized those papers incorrectly. Maybe they didn't actually claim that so strongly. And yeah, many of these apps have are freemium and require some payment for full features. Another example is Undermind. So, and I like Veronica's point in the chat, that, well, that's interesting. So you're saying you become less convinced every year that colleagues are truly reading the articles they cite. So there may already be this problem of pressure to cite, and we don't have enough capacity, and we're citing things we maybe haven't actually read. So how does throwing AI research assistants into the mix affect that? It could be a mixed effect. Maybe to some extent it would help us assess more research than we would have otherwise. What's the counterfactual? You know, we don't have infinite capacity to actually read all of those papers, and maybe getting AI summaries of them is better than nothing. But there's a big gray area. There's a really mixed effect, potentially. So Undermind, the approach is to actually give you an argument for why it's picked the papers it has, why those would be of interest to you. So again, kind of having this text response that's really more responsive to what you're saying, but still based on the papers. Keenious, as far as I understand it, the emphasis is you give it one paper and then it suggests topics and related papers. And so the foundation is you've got one good paper and you want to know what's connected to that out there. Has anyone used Keenious or Undermind? Feel free to chime in the chat if I mentioned something you've used. So Cite.ai, very, very intriguing. The idea is to not just summarize the content, but to summarize how a particular paper has been used in the subsequent academic conversation. How is it cited? Is it cited as supporting evidence or contrasting evidence or as a counter argument? I would love to know that, right? But how accurate are the assessments? Okay, interesting. Maha did try it. Tried Keenious. So SciSpace shows us a different model that a few of the apps have, where you have this kind of ChatGPT chat pane next to your search pane. And this is sort of intended to help you read the research and supposedly chat with it. And it has various suggested prompts, so things you can do. And it will do an automated literature review, right? Right? So many concerns, questions about how we can maintain skepticism of AI literature reviews, whether they're acceptable, whether they could be a useful part of a process. Clearly, we don't want to just automate the literature review because then we're not engaging with that research and we don't know if it's right. Flex PDF, that's interesting. I don't know that one. Thank you, Dr. Anand. Yeah, and John is skipping ahead. So the other two I was going to mention are ResearchRabbit and Connected Papers, which both try to map out, create a visual map of how different papers are connected to each other and which ones cite which other ones. Which again could be such a powerful tool to sort of bring to life this idea of academic research as a larger conversation and make that more accessible and relatable for students by showing that map, right? Rather than just talking about that idea. But how good is the map? Maybe it's good enough. So let's see, I want to make sure I'm seeing in the chat. There's this question about the underlying tools and Notion. Does anyone want to unmute and speak to that? John or Maha? Or we can catch up with that later. Okay. So this is just an example, and it is nice to see, for example, that all of these three papers are citing the earlier papers by Zawacki and Richter. And that might be a useful visual representation. But again, we would have to check the accuracy. One other that is I haven't actually experimented with, but I know on LinkedIn, I know Kimberly Pace Becker, one of the people who helped develop it, And this might or might not be the future of academic research, but these are academic writing consultants who've developed an app that is intended to sort of replace all the expensive premium subscriptions to AI systems and give you access to Claude and Perplexity Pro and ChatGPT Premium through its interface, which is designed to support academic research through text generation, writing feedback, research assistance with lit reviews. Not supposed to automate the critical thinking, right? So there's a lot of care that's gone into designing this. And I think that's an interesting model. I think
Well,
that, yeah,
no,
go
you
ahead.
were asking something earlier and you called my name, but I'm not 100% sure what you were saying.
Oh, okay, thanks. I just saw that there was interesting discussion in the chat that I didn't fully
Okay.
process, and I just wanted to see if you wanted to speak
So
about it.
John was talking about how the underlying technologies of each of these different AI research tools are actually different, and so understanding them might help us understand what's going
Hmm.
on.
Hmm.
I was going to ask something, and I want to ask everybody this question because this is what I keep coming up against. When I research something that is my area of specialty, using these tools, I have very rarely ever found that it cites what it should normally cite. And when it's my own work and my own terminology, it always misinterprets the term, like intentionally equitable hospitality. It always assumes it's about the hospitality business, and then it goes
Oh,
off on that track. And there are like
oh,
4 peer-reviewed papers on this topic.
wow.
So, and then whenever I try to research things related to care, I keep coming across medical care.
Mm-hmm.
So this keeps happening to me, and it goes back to what people were saying in the sense of what it's been trained on, a lot of scientific papers, a lot of very specific things, and it keeps just defaulting to these things. And so I think maybe people who are researching, like generally people who are researching engineering, for example, tend to find what they want. I
Mm.
tend to not find what I want, and if I do, it's not the
Mm-hmm.
highest quality stuff from the pool of what I want, and yeah.
Mm.
So.
So how we guide students maybe needs to be discipline specific,
Mhm.
because, you know, it might be more useful in the sciences, and there might be more misunderstanding or misrepresentation of the sources in the humanities, I hear you saying maybe, where there's phrases that could be interpreted multiple ways, like hospitality. But also when there's just a very small pool of papers, it's maybe more likely to miss something or misattribute something, possibly. I'm not sure if that's the case or not, but um, you know, major potential for just silencing of scholars and sort of skipping over in a way that's almost invisible what the real meaning of that new concept that's being introduced um, of hospitality is, and maybe students or researchers who are using these tools not realizing that at all, that that's happened. So I don't know. That's just I feel like we need to put out the message about that, and I've appreciated the way you've done that, Maha, so that people are more aware of that. Um, so I just wanted to kind of also make the point that we're not going to be able to avoid this. It's not just these sort of peripheral apps, it's also the main scholarly databases that are bringing these kinds of AI research assistants in-house. So JSTOR, Semantic Scholar, Elsevier, EBSCO, they all think this is the direction, and they need to be on board, and they need to bring these features in. So I would love to know what folks find most useful of the kinds of functionality that I've put out. Is there something that I describe, and I know we're 3 minutes out, but this is pretty much the end of what I have for you, and I wanted to just see where people were, what you would do next, what you would try that you haven't, and what tips you would have for others about how to guide students around around AI research assistants. Can we do enough to help them practice noticing where it's wrong? Is it still worth inviting them to use it? In what contexts, at what levels, in what disciplines? Those are the sort of the questions I think we're going to be continuing to wrestle with. So yeah, thanks for sharing, Laura, in the chat that you do think it would be helpful to look at the summaries of papers. I find that helpful. Anything else from the types of assistance that I described that you hadn't maybe considered that you'd like to try? Anybody else? Oh. Yeah, and Maha's saying students might use them anyway, so better to teach them how to use them critically. An opportunity to gamify the classroom, great. So yeah, giving points for identifying erroneous citations. I love that. Extra credit for any time you find the AI to be wrong. Natural language search is very, very helpful. So being able to ask our questions in our own words and not be as concerned about the technical aspects of finding the right search terms. Thanks everyone for your patience with the internet problem. I hope that this is helpful. I look forward to continued conversations on social media about it. You can find all my social links if you want to connect on my website. And I am in no rush, so I'm happy to stay on and chat a little more about any of this. A lot of expertise in the room. I want to go back to the chat and save it and do some continuing research based on what folks have said. Great. And yeah, I appreciate how David Yates puts it, that it's a productive use of time to discuss with students how these tools work and what their strengths and weaknesses are, at a minimum. Great. And I see Maha put the feedback link in the chat, so it would be great if folks could fill that out. Any other comments, questions? Something that was in the chat that I might have missed that you wanted to talk more about? Thanks, Mark.
Thank you so much, Anna.